Alright folks, here's the next project. This is a Husqvarna. This rifle was built in 1870. It was rebarreled, initially built as a flintlock muzzleloader, and was originally rebarreled, I believe, in the early 1890s to what it is now, a 12.7 by 44R. Like everything else, this would be a complete armor's level disassembly and reassembly. Working on that action. Hammer and the rolling block. That's the hammer. That's the rolling block. When you pull the rolling block back, you can see the extractor pop out. These two screws are just locking screws. These other two are actually pins. They're not actually screws. They just have a screw head on them. Of course, this one I've got has the bayonet with it. And if you look at the front, it also has the cleaning rod. Okay, first thing we're going to do is a basic field strip. To do that, make sure the rolling block is in the forward position. Remove this screw. I'm actually going to go ahead and remove them both at the same time. All these are is locking screws that hold this in place. Sometimes what you'll see is a single plate that sets between those, held in place by a screw. Take that one screw out, that one plate will pop off, and then these two pins will push out the same way as I'm about to do. Now, as you can see, this thing's got a little bit of wear and tear on it, but it was built in 1870, so a little bit of wear and tear is normal. Try to use the proper size screwdriver for doing this, because the last thing you want to do is add to the age-related damage and wear and tear that's already occurred. Now what you're going to need is a drift punch to knock these out. This one will come out pretty easy, which you'll take out second. The first one is a little bit more difficult. Roll it over. I like to protect the finish by using a nylon punch and get it started with a nylon hammer. Or knock it all the way out with a nylon hammer if you're lucky. That drift pin, rather large one, comes out. Rolling block comes out, all in one piece. Once you have that out, let the hammer go forward into the forward position, and then tap the second one out. Same thing, pin comes out, and the hammer will come out in one big piece. That's a basic field strip for cleaning purposes of this rifle. Alright, bearing in mind that the cleaning rod screws in and out, if you look, there's a slot on this. If you're lucky, this will just unscrew by hand. This one in particular, like so many others, is extremely tight. Take a screwdriver or some other similar tool, put it through that slot, and turn it to unscrew it. Now this will take several turns if it's actually screwed in all the way, because there are a lot of threads that hold this in place. I'm not going to make you watch me unscrew it all the way. Once you have it unscrewed, it'll still sometimes be kind of tight. Just put something in there, work it back and forth while you pull up on it, and eventually it'll break loose and come up for you. Or at least come up far enough that you can grab it with your hand and pull it the rest of the way out. There's the cleaning rod. As you can see, if you look at the cleaning rod, there's almost a full inch of threads that hold that in place. I'm going to start removing these screws. Like I said, on this one there are 3 clamps. You just simply unscrew. Once you have them unscrewed, they loosen and will slide off the front of the wood. Now, on the side of this piece here, you turn that to get clearance, and it'll slide the rest of the way off, which is why you have to take the cleaning rod out before you remove these. On this one, as you can see, my middle band also has my front sling swivel. It's just sandwiched between the clamp and held in place by that screw. Just like that. And again, the band slides all the way off the front of the gun, twisting it around that lug on the front. that's off. And now finally the last screw, and of course it comes off the same way as the other two. This one is a little bit more chewed up than the other ones. If it's something you're just going to keep around, those damaged screws are part of the patina. Those damaged screws have been with this gun for about 130 years. 140 years actually. And again, just slide that off. And now you have all three bands removed. Also, these screws are different sizes, so what I recommend is that you keep each screw with its associated band so you don't get them mixed up. Okay, once you have it that far, take the front of the wood, rock it down away from the metal, and then just pull the base out of the frame. A couple of small tabs on the bottom there that you need to pull out of the square hole in the frame. Now I'm going to go ahead and take the rest of the wood off. In order to do this, this is a wood screw, that's a machine screw. Pull both of those screws and the butt plate will just, or correction, the stock will just pull right off. But start with the one on the side, which is the one that's a wood screw, a self-tapping screw. Right there. Pull that out, and it threads in on the bottom there. Once both of those screws are out, the stock will just pull right off. Now once you get it that far, all you've got left is the receiver, and there's actually an upper and a lower. The trigger guard and the lower part of the receiver is all one piece, and then the upper receiver is all one piece. This screw holds in the extractor, and then these two screws hold in the guts. There's a push pin right here that you do not have to do anything with. All it does is put tension on this back flat spring. Alright, the sets are pretty easy. First thing I do is I flip it up, remove that screw. That screw will take tension off of this flat spring right here. Taking tension off that spring makes the rest of it much easier. That spring comes out with the flat spring. And again, this is something I recommend keeping together, just so you know which screw goes where. Once you have that out, that takes all of the tension off of this, and it's just held in place by a push pin. Sometimes that push pin can just be pushed out now that the tension is off. Tap it out. The drift pin. Drift pin is out of the way, and that whole piece comes off. On your sight, if this piece is missing, this front piece is pressed on like a dovetail type press, and then push that back on. Once you get that pushed back on, you may have to squeeze it to tighten it down, and then flare it slightly with those holes, with this hole here. Okay, last thing I'm going to do before I tear apart the receiver is the rolling block. The reason I'm going to tear the rolling block apart is the firing pin. If your firing pin is damaged or missing, you're going to need to tear this apart to replace it. Also, if your firing pin doesn't move, which I've seen a lot of them like that, this doesn't move or it's very hard to move, you definitely need to take it apart and clean it. These are notorious for getting a lot of rust built up inside that channel. Taking this apart is very simple, just like everything else with this rifle. It's a flathead screw. Take this screw right here and back it out. That actually holds the firing pin in place. Once you get that backed out, once you get that screw out, your firing pin should just come right out. Now most of these are old enough and tolerances are different enough, you may have to use a push pin to actually push it out, but it all comes out in one piece. Now for cleaning purposes, to make sure you get all the rust out, this opposite side of that is a plug. That's not an extension of the screw. Your screw head didn't break off. That's actually just a plug. Put the drift punch in there and that'll tap right out. Okay, now let's get to the fun part. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the extractor. That's held in place like everything else with a screwdriver or a flathead screw. This has a small nipple on the end of it. If you look right there. and that just holds the extractor in place. The extractor just slides in and out. Now certain models of these, later models, the newer ones have a slightly different extractor than this, but they're still activated by the rolling block. I think the newer ones actually are attached to the rolling block so that you get better leverage when you're opening the rolling block to extract the round. Now I'm going to take these two screws out, and those two screws will allow the upper and lower parts of this receiver to separate. It doesn't matter which one you pull first. And unlike the pins, these actually are screws. Two screws come out. Once those screws are out, this lower receiver will come out. It's in there kind of tight. Also, depending on how many times this has been apart before, or if you've had it worked on or done work on it, there's two pins right here that when you first take this apart are probably going to be very tight. Once you've had it apart the first time and cleaned them up real well, they're not going to be very tight, and as soon as this comes out, they may actually just fall out. Next thing I'm going to take off is this little thing right here. What that is, it's got a head on it. It's just a flat slot screw head, just like everything else on this thing. And what that actually is the threaded receiver where your cleaning rod inserts and threads in. And of course, that comes out just with a flathead screwdriver. Now when you put that back in, one side is bigger than the other. You'll notice, so it's kind of idiot proof. The big side goes towards the front so it can actually receive the cleaning rod. Now, the last thing I'm going to pull out of this, you do not have to pull out. However, if this is the first time you've ever taken this thing apart and you're trying to get it really clean, you're going to need to get this out to get access to the inside of the receiver to make access easier, and that's this drift pin right here. The only thing that drift pin does is hold tension on this flat spring. Once you have that pin out, you now have a completely stripped upper receiver. Okay, last is the lower receiver. I'm not going to pull the rear sling swivel just because it's held in place by a drift pin inside the receiver that is swaged in place, and I'll show that to you. Because of that, this will not come off. I'm going to start with the back spring. It's probably not going to be that easy to get off. Again, like I said, I've had this apart before and cleaned it up already. Take that off, keep the screw with it so it doesn't get lost, and set it aside. Underneath that you'll find the trigger spring. This is more of a trigger return spring because it doesn't put any tension on the spring unless the gun is cocked. Once the hammer is cocked, that will put tension on the spring. Remove this screw. And it comes right out. Take this front spring, the sear spring, take the screw out of that to relieve pressure on the sear to make the sear easier to get out. You can see as soon as that released, that sear pin came right out. Now yours probably won't unless you've had it apart before, but that all comes out in one piece, and as you can see, the bend on this flat spring goes the opposite direction of the other spring. Now once you have those out, if you've never had this apart before, you're probably going to need a drift punch to punch out those two pins. It's not going to matter which one you do first. Mine will actually just push right out. You just push it out, and that'll release the trigger, which comes out from the top. And then push that one, and that will release the sear, which comes out from the top. And then, except for the lower, or the rear sling swivel, you now have a completely stripped lower receiver.